The door of the mid-sized sedan clicked open, and the air inside the car instantly grew heavy. Han Jia glanced at the passenger through the rearview mirror. A man in a tailored suit, his neck and hands a tapestry of dark ink that promised danger. She gave him a professional, tired smile. Evening? Heading to Gangnam? Kang Do-jun didn't look at her. He merely tapped his luxury silver watch, the metal gleaming under the orange streetlights. I paid for the comfort tier to avoid the noise, he said, his voice a low, cold rasp. Just drive and shut up. Jia's smile didn't just vanish. It curdled. She paused, her hands tightening on the steering wheel as the neon lights of Seoul blurred past. Excuse me? You're a driver, not a podcast, he muttered, staring out the window at the passing city boke. If I wanted to hear someone's life story, I would have called my therapist. Keep your mouth closed and your eyes on the road. Jia's jaw dropped. She looked at his sharp, angular jawline and the lethal tattoos climbing toward his ear. Most people would have trembled, but Jia had just finished a 12-hour shift. Okay. Listen here, Mr. High-Rises and Hairspray, she snapped, meeting his cold eyes in the mirror with a defiant smirk. You booked an Uber, not a sanctuary. My car, my rules. You want absolute silence? She didn't blink. Order a hearse and climb in. Otherwise, deal with the fact that I exist. Do-jun turned fully toward her. He didn't look angry. He looked stunned, his focused expression breaking as he truly saw the woman behind the wheel, her voluminous curls and the fire in her almond eyes. He was hooked. Hey, everyone. Before we dive into how this Mafia boss reacts to being talked back to for the first time in a decade, do me a favor. Drop a comment below and let me know your favorite enemies to lovers trope. Your engagement keeps these stories coming. And make sure to hit that subscribe button, because the way he tries to fix her life in the next chapter is something you won't want to miss. Do-jun turned back to the window as if she had ceased to exist, but his jaw remained tight. Jia scoffed quietly and pulled into the heart of the Seoul traffic. Great, she muttered. Another 5-star charmer. She reached for the console and cranked an Afrobeat track, the bass-heavy drums filling the small space. She saw him flinch in the mirror and felt a surge of petty satisfaction. The sun had barely begun to burn through the Seoul smog the next morning when Jia's phone chimed with its first request. She reached for it, expecting a groggy commuter heading to the office, but the name on the screen made her breath hitch. K. Do-jun. She stared at the 5-star rating and the black car icon for a long second before sighing and tapping accept. It was a job after all, and her rent didn't care about her pride. She pulled up to the same glass-fronted high-rise, and he was already there, looking like he'd stepped straight out of a noir film in a fresh tailored suit. He slid into the passenger seat without a word, the scent of expensive cologne and ozone filling the cabin again. Jia didn't wait for his icy command this time. She just pulled into traffic. Back for more hearse talk, Mr. Sunshine? She asked, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. Drive, he said, though the edge in his voice was slightly dulled. The ride was short, ending at a discreet private club. But as soon as she dropped him off and cleared the ride, her phone chimed again. K. Do-jun. She looked at the sidewalk. He was standing 5 feet away, phone in hand, looking directly at her through the glass. You haven't even gone inside yet, she muttered, rolling down the window. What gives? I require a consistent standard of service, Do-jun replied, his expression unreadable, despite the intricate tattoos framing his jaw. I've secured your time for the day. Jia scoffed, trying to go offline on the app, but the button was grayed out. A system error message flashed before being replaced by a permanent booking notification. She tried to refresh it, but the app was locked. Every time she tried to log off, the interface defaulted back to his profile. Did you just hack my app?" she asked, her eyes wide as she looked from the phone to his polished, focused face. "I prefer the term priority scheduling," he said, a ghost of a smirk playing on his lips. "You wanted me to deal with the fact that you exist. I'm simply making sure I don't miss the experience." Gia gripped the wheel, her knuckles turning white against her dark skin. "This is stalking. This is a 1-star offense, Do-jun. I'm not your private chauffeur." "You are today," he countered, sliding back into the seat. "And since you're so fond of the radio, feel free to play whatever vibe you choose. I'm paying for the noise." Gia glared at him in the mirror, but the defiance in her curls seemed to vibrate with a new kind of energy. She realized she wasn't just a driver anymore. She was his newest obsession. The neon glow of a 24-hour gas station was the only thing cutting through the thick soul mist when the back door of the sedan swung open with a violent thud. Gia didn't even have time to offer a sarcastic greeting before the smell hit her. Copper and sharp ozone. In the rear-view mirror, Do-jun didn't look like a polished kingpin anymore. His white dress shirt was ruined, a blooming crimson stain spreading across his ribs, and his breath came in ragged, shallow hitches. "Don't look," he rasped, his hand clutching his side, blood seeping through his tattooed fingers. "Just drive." Gia didn't put the car in gear. Instead, she killed the engine. "Oh, absolutely not. You are not bleeding out on my leather seats, Mr. Sunshine. I just had this car detailed." Her voice was sharp with its usual edge, but her hands were already reaching into the glove box for the heavy-duty first aid kit she kept for Seoul's chaotic road culture. She hopped out of the driver's seat and rounded the car, throwing the back door wide. When she saw the jagged tear in his side, her breath hitched, but her instincts took over. "Move over," she commanded. Do-jun looked ready to protest, his dark eyes clouded with pain, but the sheer authority in her gaze, a mix of Brooklyn grit and maternal steel, silenced him. He slumped back as she knelt on the floor of the car, her voluminous curls shadowing her face as she worked. "You're lucky I spent 2 years in nursing school before I realized I liked driving better than doctors," she muttered, snapping on a pair of latex gloves. She doused a pad and antiseptic, and Do-jun hissed, his body jerking. "Steady," she whispered, her tone softening just a fraction. "Or I might accidentally miss a stitch. And believe me, with the way you've been acting, you owe me a very large tip for this." As she began the delicate work of closing the wound under the flickering fluorescent light of the parking lot, the silence between them changed. It wasn't the hostile quiet of their first ride, but something heavy and fragile. Do-jun watched her, the way her focused eyes didn't flicker at the sight of blood, the way her warm skin glowed against the stark black of her hoodie. "Why are you helping me?" he asked, his voice barely a thread. "I'm a monster to people like you." Gia tied off the final stitch with a decisive tug and looked up, her face inches from his. "First of all, you're a passenger with a very expensive booking," she said, her smirk returning like a shield. "And second, monsters don't bleed this much. Now put your shirt back on. We're still 3 miles from your safe house, and I'm charging you for the cleaning supplies." The morning sun had barely crested the Seoul skyline when Gia stepped out of her apartment, keys in hand and a thermos of coffee tucked under her arm. She expected to see her trusty, slightly dented sedan, the one with the stubborn passenger door and the faint smell of vanilla air freshener. Instead, a monolith of matte black steel sat in its place. It was a beast of a machine, a high-end luxury SUV with reinforced glass so dark it looked like polished obsidian. Gia froze. Her thumb hovered over her old key fob, which was now as useless as a toy. Propped against the windshield wiper was a simple white card with 2 words written in sharp, elegant calligraphy. Upgrade. Drive. "You have got to be kidding me," she muttered, her coffee forgotten on the pavement as she marched toward the vehicle. She didn't have to wait long. A sleek black sedan pulled up across the street, and Do-jun stepped out. He looked immaculate, his tattoos hidden beneath a fresh silk shirt, though he moved with a slight stiffness that reminded her of the stitches she'd pulled through his skin just nights before. "It's armored," he said, skipping the greeting as he approached. "Run flat tires, reinforced chassis, and explosive-resistant glass. You'll be safe." Gia didn't look impressed. She looked livid. "Safe? Do-jun, this isn't an upgrade. This is a tank. I'm an Uber driver, not a mercenary. Take it back." Do-jun's jaw tightened, the ink on his neck shifting with the movement. "After what happened at the gas station, you are a target. My rivals don't care about your 5-star ratings. They care that you helped me. Then give me a bodyguard or a different route." Gia snapped, stepping into his personal space, her voluminous curls bouncing with her indignation. "You don't get to just swap out my life for a shiny black cage. I worked 3 years to pay off my car. That dented sedan was mine. This is just you trying to buy a version of me that's easier to control." "I'm trying to keep you alive," he lowered his voice, his dark eyes searching hers, desperate and cold all at once. "No," Gia countered, her voice dropping to a dangerous, steady whisper. "You're trying to buy my gratitude so you don't have to feel guilty about the target on my back. I told you, Do-jun, my car, my rules, and I don't drive blood money charity." She shoved the keys he had sent her back into his hand, the metal clicking against his luxury watch. For a moment, the silence between them was as heavy as the armored plating of the car. Do-jun looked at the keys, then at the defiant woman standing before him. And for the second time in a week, he realized that money was the only language she refused to speak. The drive to the coast was a forced truce, punctuated only by the hum of the tires against the asphalt and the distant, rhythmic crash of the East Sea. Do-jun had remained silent for the first 2 hours, his gaze fixed on the dark horizon, while Gia navigated the winding roads with a focused intensity. The tension from their argument over the armored car still simmered. But as the city lights faded into the rear view, the air in the cabin shifted from hostile to heavy. "You keep looking at it," Do-jun said suddenly, his voice low and devoid of its usual sharp authority. He didn't have to specify what. He felt her eyes flicking toward his neck every time they passed under a street lamp. Gia didn't deny it. She kept her hands steady on the wheel. "It's hard not to. It's a lot of ink for someone who claims to hate noise. Geometric patterns, traditional scales. It looks like a map of something you're trying to hide." Do-jun leaned his head back against the headrest, exposing the full length of his throat. The light caught the intricate lines that traced up to his jaw. "It's not a map. It's a ledger," he said, his tone turning melancholic. He traced the edge of a jagged dark crest near his collarbone. "This piece was for my brother. He was the one who was supposed to lead, not me. He was the shield of our family. When he died, I took his mark so I would never forget the weight of the protection I failed to give. Gia's foot eased off the accelerator slightly. The cold boss she had been bickering with was gone, replaced by a man wearing his grief in permanent black and gray ink. And the rest? She asked softly. Debts, he replied, his eyes finally meeting hers in the mirror. Every time I have to do something that costs me a piece of my soul, I add to the ink. It's a reminder that my skin isn't mine anymore. It belongs to the sins of the position I hold. People see the Mafia boss, and they feel fear. I look in the mirror, and I just see the tally of what I've lost. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of the weight of his confession. Gia realized then that his obsession with her attitude wasn't just a challenge. It was a thirst for someone who treated him like a human being rather than a ledger of sins. Well, she said, her voice cracking the gravity of the moment with a gentle, familiar spark. If your neck is a ledger, you'd better leave some room, because by the time I'm done with you, you're going to owe me enough for a whole new sleeve just in inconvenience fees. Do-jun didn't smirk, but the shadow in his eyes lifted just a fraction. For the first time, he didn't look like a predator. He looked like a man who was finally beginning to breathe. The neon pulse of the city felt different tonight. Sharper, colder, and heavy, with a rhythm Gia couldn't quite catch. She was parked in a narrow alleyway behind a luxury hotel, waiting for Do-jun's signal, when the back door opened. It wasn't the familiar, heavy presence of the man with the ledger on his neck. This passenger moved like a shadow, sliding into the leather seat with a sickeningly smooth grace. Gia didn't look back immediately. The booking hasn't started yet, pal, she said, her voice holding its usual edge, though her heart had begun a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. A beautiful woman like you shouldn't be working such dangerous hours, a voice replied. It was high, melodic, and entirely devoid of warmth. Gia glanced at the rearview mirror. The man was young, dressed in a pale gray suit that looked ghostly in the dim light. He wasn't tattooed like Do-jun. His skin was unnervingly clear, but his eyes held a vacuum-like emptiness that made her skin crawl. He reached out, his fingers tracing the stitching of the headrest just inches from her voluminous curls. Who are you? Gia asked, her hand slowly moving toward the emergency button on her dashboard. A friend of a friend, the man said, leaning forward until his breath fogged the glass of the mirror. Tell Kang Do-jun that he's getting sloppy. He started keeping things he can't afford to lose. And in our world, anything you can't lose becomes a leash. He reached into his jacket, and for a terrifying heartbeat, Gia thought he was pulling a weapon. Instead, he tossed a small, heavy object onto the passenger seat. It was a single, blackened scale from a dragon, the emblem of the White Dragon Syndicate. Tell him the debt is coming due, the stranger whispered, and tell him that next time I won't be here to leave a message. I'll be here to collect. Before Gia could find her breath to fire back a sarcastic retort, the door clicked open and he was gone, vanishing into the mouth of the alley as if he'd never been there at all. The car felt cavernous and freezing. Gia stared at the black scale on her seat, the weight of Do-jun's world finally crashing down on her. Her independence, her my car, my rules, bravado, it all felt like paper armor against the storm that was coming. When Do-jun finally appeared minutes later, his face hardened the moment he saw her. He didn't need to ask. He saw the scale, and he saw the way her hands were shaking on the steering wheel. For the first time, Gia didn't have a joke ready. She just looked at him, the reality of being his soft spot, turning the city lights into a blur of predatory eyes. The elevators in Do-jun's penthouse moved with a silence that felt like a burial. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, overlooking a soul that looked like a glittering circuit board. But to Gia, it was just a very expensive box. For 3 days, Do-jun had kept her there under the guise of security, surrounding her with marble counters, silk sheets, and 2 silent guards stationed at the door, who looked like they were carved from the same granite as the building. "You can't stay here forever, Do-jun," Gia said, pacing the length of the living room. Her voluminous curls were pulled back, and she was still wearing the black hoodie she'd had on the night the white dragon messenger appeared. "I have a life. I have a rating to maintain. I have a craving for something that doesn't taste like a 5-star chef made it." Do-jun didn't look up from the digital map spread across his desk. The tattoos on his neck seemed darker, more prominent against the clinical white light of the apartment. "The scale on your seat wasn't a suggestion, Gia. It was a promise. Until I clear the debt with the syndicate, you are the only leverage they have. You stay here." "Leverage? I'm a person, not a poker chip," she snapped. She watched him for a moment, the focused, angular set of his jaw, and the way he checked his luxury watch every 10 minutes, as if timing the apocalypse. He wasn't just protecting her. He was trying to own her safety. By midnight, Gia had reached her limit. She knew the guards changed shifts at 12:05. She also knew that the service elevator in the kitchen was used for laundry delivery and didn't require a biometric scan if you timed the sensor right. She moved like a shadow, slipping into the industrial-sized laundry bin, just as the exhausted attendant turned his back. The descent was jarring, but the moment the doors opened into the humid, oil-scented air of the basement garage, she felt her lungs expand. She didn't head for the armored beast Do-jun had bought her. Instead, she found a dusty, red moped tucked in a corner, likely belonging to one of the kitchen staff, and hot-wired it with the practiced ease of someone who grew up knowing that mobility was survival. 10 minutes later, she was sitting on a plastic stool at a street-corner taco stand 3 districts away, the spicy aroma of grilled carnitas drowning out the scent of Do-jun's expensive cologne. She was halfway through her second taco when a black sedan screeched to a halt at the curb. Do-jun stepped out, looking frantic, his suit jacket discarded, and his white sleeves rolled up to reveal the ink on his forearms. He looked at her, sitting there in her hoodie with salsa on her thumb, and for a second, the Mafia boss looked like he was going to have a heart attack. "You broke out of a 1,000,000,001 security system," he hissed, looming over her, "for street food?" Gia took a deliberate bite and smirked up at him, her dark eyes sparkling with the old defiance. "I told you, Mr. Sunshine. My life, my rules. And I don't stay in cages, not even golden ones. Want a taco? I'm buying, since you're technically still on my clock." The neon reflection of the taco stand was still a warm memory in Gia's rearview mirror when the atmosphere turned lethal. They were halfway across the Mapo Bridge, the Han River a black void beneath them, when 2 silver sedans veered sharply out of the shadows, boxing them in against the concrete railing. Gia's pulse spiked, but her hands stayed steady on the wheel of the armored SUV. Beside her, Do-jun's hand went instinctively to the holster tucked inside his waistband, his face hardening into the mask of the predator. "Stay low," he commanded, his voice a low growl. When they stop us, I need you to climb into the back. It's reinforced." "Who said anything about stopping?" Gia countered, her eyes narrowing as she spotted a third car closing the gap in front of them. The White Dragon Syndicate wasn't playing games. They wanted a head-on collision. "Gia, this isn't a game. They'll kill you to get to me," Do-jun snapped, his gaze flickering between the encroaching headlights and the woman beside him. He looked at her, expecting to see the terror he was used to, but all he found was a sharp, knowing smirk. "You keep forgetting, Mr. Sunshine," she said, her voice dropping into a rhythmic, calm cadence. "You might own the streets, but I'm the one who knows how to drive them." As the lead silver car braked hard to force them into a spin, Gia didn't slam on the brakes. Instead, she floored the accelerator, aiming straight for the narrow gap between the railing and the lead car's fender. Do-jun braced for impact, his jaw tight, but at the last millisecond, Gia yanked the handbrake and cut the wheel with a violent, precise jerk. The heavy SUV didn't crash. It drifted, the rear tires screaming as the vehicle performed a perfect 180-degree J-turn on the rain-slicked pavement. The maneuver was so sudden and so tight that the rival drivers overcompensated, their cars sliding into one another with a cacophony of twisting metal and shattering glass. Before the echoes of the crash could fade, Gia slammed the car into reverse, whipped the wheel back around, and launched them toward the bridge's exit ramp. Do-jun sat back, his breath hitching as the adrenaline slowly began to recede. He looked at Gia, her voluminous curls framing a face that was now glowing with the thrill of the chase. She looked at him through the mirror, her almond eyes dancing with victory. "5-star service, right?" she teased, though her own hands were finally starting to tremble. Do-jun didn't answer immediately. He looked at the wreckage behind them, then back at the driver who had just saved his life with a stunt that should have been impossible. "I think," he said softly, "I might need to give you a raise." "I told you," Gia laughed, the sound bright against the city skyline. "My car, my rules." The adrenaline from the bridge had cooled into something far more dangerous. A heavy, suffocating silence. They were parked in a secluded overlook above the Han River, the city's lights shimmering like a spilled box of jewels. Do-jun stared out at the water, his profile etched in sharp, agonizing lines. The ink on his neck seemed to throb with every pulse of the lighthouse in the distance. "I'm terminating our arrangement, Gia," he said, his voice as flat as a blade. "The booking is canceled. The armored car is yours to keep. But I've already had a ticket to Brazil booked in your name. You leave tonight." Gia, who had been leaning against the steering wheel, trying to stop her hands from shaking, froze. She turned slowly, her voluminous curls shadowing her face. "Excuse me? Brazil? I don't even speak Portuguese, Do-jun." "It doesn't matter," he snapped, finally looking at her. His dark eyes were bloodshot, the cold boss facade cracked beyond repair. "You almost died tonight because of a man who has sins written on his skin. I won't watch you become another tally on my ledger. You're fired. Get out of the car." Gia didn't move. She didn't reach for the door handle. Instead, she reached for the dashboard and tapped her phone. The Uber interface glowed bright, showing a ride still in progress, a ride that had been active since the moment he hacked her app. "I don't think you heard me," he growled, reaching over to grab her phone. Gia slapped his hand away with a sharp crack. "No, you didn't hear me. My car, my rules, and according to this app, I'm still on the clock. You didn't just book a ride, Do-jun. You booked a driver, and I don't leave a job half-finished. This isn't a job anymore. It's a death warrant. It's a choice, she shouted back, her voice echoing in the small cabin. She leaned in, her warm skin inches from his tattooed jaw. You think you're being noble by throwing me away? You're just being a coward. You're scared that if I stay, you'll have something to live for besides your debts. Well, newsflash, Mr. Sunshine. I'm not a 5-star rating you can just delete. I'm staying. Do-jun's breath hitched. He looked at her, searching for the fear that would justify his decision to send her away. But all he found was that same fierce defiance. She was the only person in the world who looked at the monster and saw a man worth driving for. I haven't finished my shift yet, she said, her voice dropping to a soft, steady hum. And you still haven't told me where we're going next? Do-jun closed his eyes, a single shaky breath escaping him. He realized then that he hadn't just met his match. He'd met his destination. The sky over Seoul was beginning to turn a bruised purple. The first hint of dawn bleeding through the city's smog as the SUV sat idling by the river. Do-jun stared at the phone screen, the digital map still tracking a journey that had long ago veered off its intended path. The weight of his world, the debts, the ink, the shadows, felt a little lighter in the presence of the woman who refused to be intimidated by any of it. All right, he said, his voice quiet, almost a whisper of surrender. He looked at Gia, seeing not a liability, but the only person who had ever looked him in the eye without flinching. If you stay, the rules have to change. My world isn't a place for comfort to your passengers. It's a war zone. Gia leaned back into her seat, a small triumphant smile playing on her lips. She reached out and adjusted the rearview mirror, making sure her curls were just as defiant as her attitude. I know exactly where we are, Do-jun, and I'm telling you now, if I'm the one behind the wheel, you don't get to bark orders from the back. We do this as partners, or I'm dropping you off at the nearest bus stop and giving you a 1-star rating for inability to cooperate. A sound escaped Do-jun's throat, a dry, raspy huff that might have been the first laugh he'd uttered in a decade. He reached out, his tattooed hand hovering over hers on the center console. He didn't grab it. He waited for her to bridge the gap. When she did, her warm fingers interlacing with his, the deal was sealed. Fine, he murmured, his dark eyes softening as they met hers. The armored car stays. Your attitude stays. And from now on, you choose the route. Gia nodded, her expression shifting from playful to resolute. She shifted the car into drive, the powerful engine purring beneath them like a caged beast. Good choice, Mr. Sunshine. Now, first order of business. We're going back to the taco stand. I'm still hungry, and you're going to learn that sometimes the best way to handle a crisis is with extra salsa. As the SUV pulled away from the overlook, merging into the early morning traffic, they weren't just a boss and a driver anymore. They were two people navigating a dangerous new map together. Do-jun leaned back, watching the city blur past, and for the first time in his life, he didn't check his watch. He just sat back and followed her lead, realizing that a dangerous love was far better than a safe, lonely life in the dark. The ride wasn't over. It was just beginning.